I'm Alexis Moore, 31 years old, and I never thought that a $1 $2 million house would become the heaviest burden of my life. The mansion my father left me, supposed to be a sanctuary, a safe place after all the chaos, became the stage for the most painful betrayal I've ever experienced. But this wasn't just about a house. It was about a lifetime of manipulation and guilt, and I was done being the pawn. But before I tell you how it all unfolded, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family who treated you like a means to an end? Drop a comment below, and if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe for more of my story. Trust me, you'll want to know what happens next. It all started when I overheard my father, Bruce, and my mother, Carla, talking about me. I was sitting in my bedroom after a long day at work when I heard them from downstairs. They didn't know I was home. They didn't know I could hear every word they said. "I don't know why she hasn't just signed the deed over to us already," my father's voice echoed. "The house is worth over $1 million now. It's time for her to do the right thing and give it back." That house, my inheritance, had always been the one thing I thought I could count on, something my father had worked his entire life to build. But instead of seeing it as a gift, something to honor, my parents saw it as a cash cow, their retirement plan. And me, I was nothing more than a burden to them. "I don't understand why your mother left it to her in the first place," my mother added, her voice as cold as ever. "She's had everything handed to her on a silver platter. This house should have been ours." The anger and disgust in their voices was overwhelming. My blood ran cold. Here they were, plotting behind my back, scheming to take the one thing I had left after losing my father, a thing that represented everything I'd fought for. I had spent so many years trying to meet their impossible expectations. And now, this house, the very thing I thought would be my legacy, my freedom, was nothing more than a tool for their manipulation. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just a daughter to them, I was a resource. Every sacrifice I made, every penny I earned, was seen as something they deserved. And when I decided to stand up for myself, when I tried to build a life independent of them, that's when they plotted to take what was mine. But I was done. Done trying to earn their love. Done pretending that their constant need for control was somehow my fault. I had given enough. It was time to take my life back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but as the conversation went on, I made a choice. A choice to stop letting them control my every move, my every decision. When they returned from their luxurious European vacation, a trip they'd taken on my dime, I was ready. I had already made up my mind to cut the ties once and for all. Their key didn't fit in the lock when they came back. Their things, already packed and stored, I left them a note. Surprise, a burden did this. I sat in the empty house, the silence now louder than the voices that once filled these walls. I hadn't expected to feel so unsettled. After everything, I thought I would feel relief, freedom, even. But in that moment, I felt hollow. The echoes of my past, of the years I'd spent trapped in a life that wasn't mine, haunted me. The house, now stripped of all the things that once made it home, family pictures, mementos, the worn-in couches, was just space. Nothing more. Nothing less. I had always been a person who found comfort in the familiar. But now, sitting here in the center of this grand, empty home, I realized I had spent my whole life making myself small for others. For my parents. I'd spent years living up to their expectations, hoping one day they would love me for me. Instead, they had loved me for what I could give them. In those quiet moments, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the betrayal. It wasn't just about the house. It was about every unspoken expectation, every sacrifice I had made for their approval. My parents, the people who should have cared for me unconditionally, had used me as a stepping stone for their own gains. Every time they said, "We did this for you," I had been too naive to understand that it was always about them. I was never their daughter. I was a tool, a resource, a means to an end. The note I'd left them had been simple: surprise. A burden did this. It had been my way of reclaiming the power they had so ruthlessly stripped from me. But even as I read those words in my mind again, I knew they were only the beginning. I was still carrying the burden of everything they had done to me. The question was, how would I let go? My phone buzzed, breaking my train of thought. It was a message from Marcus, the realtor I had contacted to sell the house. The sale was already moving faster than I had anticipated. The buyer, A corporate executive who had been eyeing properties in the area was eager to close the deal. There was no turning back now. I couldn't help but think back to the conversation with my parents, their voices dripping with entitlement. "She's always had everything handed to her," my father had said. "She doesn't need that house. We do." Their words echoed in my head, sharp, cutting through the silence. They didn't just want the house. They wanted everything. But I had made a decision. I wasn't going to give them that power anymore. Not over my life, not over my happiness. I turned off my phone. I didn't need to hear from them. I didn't need to listen to their manipulations anymore. What I needed now was clarity. What I needed was to figure out what came next. I stood up, walking through the rooms of the house that had been my prison for so long. The kitchen, where I'd spent hours preparing meals, pretending everything was fine. The living room, where we'd had holiday dinners with forced smiles, pretending to be the perfect family. And the garden, where I'd planted flowers with my grandmother, the only place in this house where I'd ever felt truly at peace. But that peace was gone now. My grandmother, the one person who had ever truly seen me for who I was, had passed away years ago. She had been the one to see potential in me. She had always believed in my worth, even when I couldn't believe it myself. That was why she left me the house. She had seen the person I could become, not the one I had been forced to be. Her letter, the one I had found while packing up the house, confirmed that. She had known what was coming before I did. Her words echoed in my mind as I walked through the empty house. "You deserve everything good that comes to you, Alexis. Never doubt your worth." I had spent so many years doubting myself, doubting my worth. But now, for the first time, I understood what she had meant. I had to stop playing small. I had to stop letting others define me. And most importantly, I had to stop letting them steal my happiness. The phone rang again, and this time I didn't ignore it. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it hesitantly, still unsure whether I wanted to hear from anyone, least of all from my parents. "Alexis," my mother's voice came through, sounding both strained and falsely concerned. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I replied, my voice steady. The calm I felt surprised me, but it was the calm of someone who had finally had enough. "There's nothing left to discuss." "What do you mean?" She sounded confused, almost pleading. "You can't just sell the house like this. We were supposed to be part of the decision, Alexis. It's our future, too." "No," I said again, the weight of my words sinking in. "It's my future now, Mom, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to make decisions for me. Not for you, not for Dad, for me." Her response was an angry silence. I waited for her to speak, but she didn't. I hung up the phone, the finality of my actions hitting me all at once. I had made the choice to stop being the sacrificial lamb, to stop being the burden they always saw me as. This was no longer about pleasing them. This was about me finally taking control of my own life. In the days that followed, I threw myself into the process of preparing for the sale of the house. I worked with Marcus to finalize everything. We had a quick closing scheduled, and soon the house would be gone sold. It felt strange to say it, but I was ready. I was ready to let go of the past and start fresh. I wasn't just selling a house. I was selling the illusion of family, of duty, and of guilt. Each task I completed brought a sense of detachment. I no longer felt the weight of my parents' expectations bearing down on me. I felt free, empowered, like I could breathe again. The house had been a physical manifestation of my guilt and my sacrifice, but now it was just bricks and wood. It wasn't my burden anymore. It never had been. But of course, my parents weren't going to let it go that easily. They began contacting me relentlessly. They sent emails, text messages, voicemails, anything they could do to pressure me. The messages were full of manipulation, guilt, and even threats. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. They didn't deserve an explanation. Then came the email that shook me to my core. They had somehow found my new email address. The subject line read, "What have you done? You've betrayed us." I opened it, my heart racing as I read their words. The accusations, the guilt trips, the lies. They claimed I had misunderstood everything. They claimed that they were entitled to the house. And then, they made their final demand: "If you don't give us the house, we'll sue." I sat there for a long moment, just staring at the screen. The rage in my chest rose, but it wasn't the anger I had felt before. This wasn't the anger of a daughter who had been wronged. This was the anger of someone who was finally awake. I wasn't going to be manipulated by them anymore. I wasn't going to let them use me as their puppet. I forwarded the email to Patricia, my attorney, for documentation. She confirmed what I already knew: I had every right to sell the house. Legally, my parents had no claim. But emotionally, it was a different story. They had used guilt and manipulation to control me for so long that it had become second nature. But not anymore. The sale closed in a matter of days. The buyers were eager to move in, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was stepping into something that was mine. Not my parents', not my family's, mine. As I stood at the closing table, signing the final papers, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also something deeper. Something I had never felt before. Freedom. The kind of freedom that only comes when you finally realize your own worth. When you stop living for others and start living for yourself. When I walked out of the title office, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. I was done with the past, done with the guilt, done with trying to prove myself. I was finally free to start my own journey. In the weeks that followed, I found peace in the small things. Setting up my new apartment, making it a place that was all mine. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. The place where I could finally breathe without feeling like I had to apologize for existing. I could finally live life on my own terms. And yes, I still hear from my parents. They still send me messages, still try to get me to feel guilty, still try to control me. But now I have a new strength. I've learned to set boundaries, to protect myself. And most importantly, I've learned that the burden I carried wasn't my parents' demands, but my own need to please them. That burden is gone. And what's left is my life, ready for me to live, fully, freely, and unapologetically. I had convinced myself that I was done. The house was sold. The weight of my past, the manipulation, the guilt, it was all being left behind. But something about this new life I was creating still felt incomplete. I had the apartment, I had a fresh start, but I also had an emptiness inside me that didn't vanish with the sale of the house. For weeks, I threw myself into work, buried myself in the routine of showing homes, working with clients. I even took up yoga, something I never thought I'd do. I thought that maybe some quiet time would help me find peace, help me heal. But every time I was still, every time I had a moment to myself, my mind would race back to them, my parents. Their voices, the betrayal, the twisted web they'd spun for me. And then it came. That one phone call that shook everything I thought I knew. I was sitting in the small living room of my apartment, a cup of coffee in hand, scrolling through my emails. I hadn't checked my old inbox in days. Then it popped up. A new message. The subject line read, "We know where you are." I froze, the color draining from my face. It wasn't from my parents, but the message was unsettling all the same. The email was brief, almost cold. "We know you're living in Richmond now. We've been watching you. Your father wants to meet. It's time to end this. Don't make this worse for yourself." My first thought was that it was a prank, some twisted joke. But my gut told me something was off. I hadn't changed my contact information, and I hadn't told anyone I was moving to Richmond, except for my parents. Suddenly, I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. Had they been following me? Did they know where I lived? I called Marcus immediately. "Someone just emailed me saying they know where I am. What the hell is going on?" Marcus sounded concerned. "Alexis, are you sure you're safe? Maybe it's time to think about a restraining order." I nodded, though no one could see me. "I'm not sure, but I need to know what they want. I can't let them get away with this." Marcus was right. Something about the email didn't sit well with me. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a threat. A sign that my parents weren't done with me, not by a long shot. As I tried to process the email, I remembered the last time I saw them, the coffee shop, the meeting where I'd set my final boundaries. I had walked away that day, feeling victorious, knowing I'd cut them off for good. But now I was starting to feel the weight of that victory slip away. I realized how much I still feared them. Fear, not love, fear of their judgment, fear of their wrath. Fear that, no matter how much I had changed, they still had some hold over me. But I wasn't going to let them win again. I wasn't going to let them control my future the way they had controlled my past. No more. I locked my apartment door that night and turned off my phone, hoping for some peace, hoping I could finally sleep without worrying about what was lurking in the shadows. But sleep never came. The following morning, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside. My heart dropped. It couldn't be him. I opened the door cautiously. The The man flashed a tight smile. "Ms. Moore," he asked, "I'm here to deliver a message from your father." Before I could say anything, he handed me a large envelope and turned to leave. No explanation, no further words, just the envelope. The moment he walked away, I quickly closed the door behind me, my hands trembling. I knew this couldn't be good. I opened the envelope and my stomach dropped. Inside was a letter from my father. His handwriting, sharp and deliberate, filled the page. "Alexis, you've made a mistake. We're not going to let you destroy this family. You will sign the house back over to us. You have 24 hours to comply. If you don't, we'll take legal action. You know how this works." I felt the blood rush to my head. Legal action. My father was threatening me again, but this time it felt different. There was a new weight behind his words, a sense of finality. He wasn't just upset anymore, he was desperate. Desperate to control me. Desperate to get back what he believed was rightfully his. I couldn't sit there and let it happen. I had fought too hard to let it slip away again. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about my freedom. About finally standing up for myself. The question wasn't whether I was going to fight back, it was how far I was willing to go. I called Patricia, my lawyer, and told her everything. I didn't care if it got ugly. I didn't care if they tried to drag me into their world of manipulation again. This was the moment. The moment I would take the final stand. "Patricia, we're going to fight this," I said, my voice firmer than I ever thought I'd be. "I want to make sure they can never control me again." Patricia's response was calm, but I could feel the weight of her understanding in her words. "Alexis, I've seen cases like this before, and I think you're right. It's time to make sure they don't have a hold on you anymore. Let's do this." But just as I was about to feel a sense of relief, the twist came. It wasn't just my father who was involved. The envelope I had received wasn't the only thing they had been planning. The email, the lawyer's letter, these were just the tip of the iceberg. As I sat in my apartment, digesting the weight of everything that had been happening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, my fingers shaking. The message read, "You're not the only one in danger. Your parents have involved others. If you don't comply, you won't be the only one paying the price." My mind raced. What did that mean? I thought back to the lawyer's letter, the threats, the intimidation tactics my parents had used. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in months, the connections my father had. The deals, the business associates who had their own agendas. I hadn't considered that. The walls were closing in. My parents weren't just trying to manipulate me into giving up my house. They had deeper connections, people who could make this situation a whole lot worse for me. And I had no idea who those people were. It was then that I realized they were never just trying to control me for the house. It was about something bigger. They were trying to control my entire future. Suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for my life. My future, my freedom. I had a choice. I could play their game and keep running, or I could fight back once and for all. The game was changing, and I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I stared at the phone in my hand, the words from that ominous text message still flashing in my mind. "You won't be the only one paying the price." My body trembled with a cold, gnawing fear I couldn't shake. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring everything crashing down at once. My thoughts raced in circles, and every time I tried to focus, a new layer of anxiety added weight to my chest. What did it mean? Who were these people my father had involved? I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something more was at play here than just a fight over a house. This wasn't just about property, it was about power. My parents had never just wanted the house. They wanted everything, control over my life, my choices, my peace of mind. For so long, I had lived under their thumb. Every decision, every step, every part of me had been dictated by them. I had been their puppet, their investment. And now I was trying to break free. But breaking free wasn't easy. It wasn't just about walking away from the house. It was about breaking away from the cycle of manipulation that had been my reality for years. The cycle where they made me feel guilty for every success, every accomplishment. The cycle where I always felt like I wasn't enough unless I did things for them. I felt exhausted. The fight for freedom had drained me. It felt like no matter how hard I tried to leave the past behind, it kept creeping in, reminding me of my shortcomings, of everything I had sacrificed to be accepted. And now, here I was again, staring down the same fear I had lived with all my life. Fear that I wasn't strong enough. Fear that, in the end, I would fail. Fear that no matter how far I ran, I would always end up right back where I started. I walked around my apartment, the four walls suddenly feeling like they were closing in on me. I had worked so hard to escape, to carve out a life that was mine. And yet, everything I had built seemed so fragile, like a house of cards waiting to collapse. Was I truly free, or had I just traded one form of captivity for another? I picked up the letter my father had sent, his ultimatum. He had always been good at making me feel like I owed him, that I was somehow indebted to him for everything he had given me. He had made me feel small, incapable, like I could never survive without his approval. And now, this letter, this demand for control over the house, was just another reminder of how far he would go to keep me in his grip. But then I thought about everything I had been through. I thought about the last few months, selling the house, cutting them off, standing up for myself. It had been hard, but I had done it. I had made decisions for me. Every small victory had brought me closer to who I truly was, and I wasn't going to let this man, this person who had never seen me as anything more than an asset, drag me back into the shadows. I felt anger rising in me, not just at them, but at myself. At the years I had wasted, sacrificing myself to meet their needs. How had I allowed them to convince me I wasn't enough? How had I been so blind to the truth? My emotions swung wildly, rage, sadness, and determination. I couldn't go back to the person I was, the woman who hid behind their expectations. The woman who thought she needed them. I didn't need them. That was the truth. I had spent so long trying to live up to their image of me, trying to meet their impossible standards. But now, I could finally see it. I was enough. I had always been enough. And yet, despite all my progress, here I was again, at the edge of another cliff, staring into the abyss. My parents were pulling me back, trying to drag me into the past, into the same toxic dynamic we had always had. They had always been the ones pulling the strings, controlling the narrative. But now, it was my turn. I could either let them take everything again, or I could fight for the life I had finally started to build. The fight was real now. It wasn't just a matter of selling a house. It wasn't even about money. This was about identity, self-worth, freedom. I wasn't just standing up for the house anymore. I was standing up for me. I pulled myself together, standing straighter than I had in weeks. I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. I wasn't going to let my past define my future. If I was going to face this, if I was going to make it through, I had to do it on my terms. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep hiding from them, from the choices I had made, from the past that had shaped me. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I called Patricia again, my lawyer. "We need to make this official," I told her, my voice steady and clear. "I want to make sure they can't hurt me anymore. I want to protect myself, once and for all." Her response was swift, confident. "Alexis, we've got this. We'll fight back. We'll make sure they understand that this is your life and you're the one in control. Let's get them off your back for good." I hung up the phone with a renewed sense of purpose. I was taking back my power. But just as I was feeling a sense of clarity, the twist came. The following day, while I was meeting with Marcus to finalize the last details of the house sale, I received another message. This one was different. It wasn't from my parents. It wasn't even from the same number. It read, "You don't know who you're dealing with. If you continue down this path, we won't stop until we've destroyed everything you've built." My heart dropped. Who was this? Who were these people, and how did they know so much? The chilling realization that my parents weren't acting alone hit me hard. This was bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just about a house. This wasn't just about them trying to control me. This was about something darker. Something that had been quietly festering beneath the surface, something I wasn't prepared for. I knew then that this fight wasn't just mine. It was bigger. Bigger than family. Bigger than money. This was about survival. And I would fight with everything I had. The message was a direct threat, but it also lit a fire in me. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of clarity. These people, whoever they were, weren't going to control me. Not anymore. I was done being manipulated. Done being their pawn. This was no longer just a fight for a house. This was a fight for my future, my freedom, and no matter who these people were, no matter what they threw at me, I was ready. The storm was coming, but I wasn't going to hide. I was going to face it head-on with the strength I had finally found within myself. I was done being a victim. It was time to take control. Time to make my stand. This was my moment. And I would not back down. The weight of the threats loomed over me, but I refused to be paralyzed by fear. It was no longer just about the house, or the money, or my parents' manipulation. It was about reclaiming my life. For years, I had been trapped in a cage of guilt, constantly trying to prove my worth, trying to live up to expectations that were never mine to carry. But now, the walls were starting to crumble. I had the power. I had the choice. But with that choice came an unsettling realization. This battle would be harder than I had ever imagined. These weren't just empty threats. The message from the unknown number was a warning, a declaration that things would get even uglier. And as much as I told myself I was ready to face whatever came next, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still at the mercy of forces I didn't understand. These people weren't just angry, they were dangerous. I spent the next few days consumed by a mix of fear and resolve. I reached out to Patricia, the lawyer who had been helping me navigate this nightmare, and we discussed our options. There was no longer just the possibility of legal action from my parents. It felt like there were other players involved now, people who were willing to destroy everything I had fought for. And I didn't even know who they were. I couldn't keep hiding. The fear that had once kept me awake at night, fear of their judgment, of their rejection, had morphed into something much bigger. Now I feared for my future. And more than that, I feared for the freedom I had just begun to taste. But I wasn't going to let it slip away. I couldn't. I found myself walking the streets of Richmond late one night, the city lights flickering against the darkened sky, trying to clear my head. The air was thick with tension, as if the world around me was holding its breath. I had always found comfort in solitude, in walking alone through unfamiliar streets. But tonight, I felt like a target, like everything I had built was hanging by a thread. It was then that I received another message, this one even more direct than the last. It simply read, "If you don't want things to get worse, we suggest you leave Richmond now." I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. They were getting closer. Whoever these people were, they were watching me. They knew exactly where I was, what I was doing. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave, to escape before I got sucked deeper into this dangerous web. But as I stood there in the cold, something inside me snapped. No more running. I was done with being afraid. I was done with feeling like a victim. The power my parents and these mysterious people had over me came from my own fear. Fear of losing their approval. Fear of the unknown. Fear of not being enough. But the truth was, I had already lost them. I had already sacrificed enough of myself to them. And for what? So they could keep me in a perpetual state of compromise? So they could keep me small? No. I had worked too hard to get here, to find myself, to reclaim my freedom. I wasn't going to give that up. I reached out to Marcus, my trusted realtor, and told him I needed to take the next step. He was hesitant, worried about the possible risks, but I could hear the respect in his voice when he said, "You're doing what you need to do. I'm with you." With his help, I made the decision to take the offensive. We started making arrangements for a security team to monitor my apartment, to ensure that I wasn't caught off guard again. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to prepare for the worst. These people, whoever they were, weren't going to back off without a fight. But neither was I. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this fight was bigger than just me. This was about breaking free from a system of control, of manipulation, that had been passed down to me from generations of people who thought they could dictate my worth. I wasn't just fighting for my house or for my own peace of mind. I was fighting for every person who had ever been made to feel like they were too much or too little. I was fighting for the right to stand tall and own my life, to say without fear or hesitation, "I am enough." I spent the next few days preparing. Preparing my lawyer's case, preparing my own mind, preparing for a confrontation I knew was inevitable. And when the time came, I was ready. I walked into that meeting, my heart pounding but my mind clear. I wasn't the scared little girl who had once cowered under my father's dominance. I wasn't the person who had constantly tried to please my parents, hoping for their validation. I was a woman who had fought for herself, and I wasn't about to let them take that away. I was greeted by my father, Bruce, and my mother, Carla, sitting at a table in the corner of a small, dimly lit conference room. They looked just as they always had, composed, demanding like they owned the room. But this time, something had shifted. I wasn't there to meet their demands. I was there to claim what was mine. My father's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. Alexis, I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. We've always looked out for you. Why can't you just stop? I interrupted him, my voice calm but firm. You've never looked out for me, Dad. You've used me, manipulated me, and made me feel like I was never enough. And I'm done with it. I'm done trying to prove my worth to you. My mother's eyes narrowed, her face pale with shock. She hadn't expected this. You don't mean that, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. You can't just turn your back on your family, after everything we've done for you. No, I replied, my voice stronger than I had ever heard it. I'm turning my back on you. I'm turning my back on everything you've made me believe about myself. I don't owe you anything. The room was silent for a long moment. The tension was thick, palpable. My parents sat there, staring at me as if they had never truly seen me. And for the first time in my life, I realized they never had. They had never seen me for who I was. They had only ever seen me as a means to their end. But now I saw myself. I saw the woman I had become, the woman who was ready to fight for her own life. I stood up slowly, walking to the door with the kind of confidence I had never known before. And as I reached for the door handle, I turned back to them. I hope you understand something, I said softly. The only person who gets to decide my worth from now on is me. And with that, I walked out of that room, out of that life. I had done it. I had broken free. But as I stepped into the unknown, I realized something. This fight wasn't just about standing up to my parents, or protecting the house, or even the threats from the people they had brought into this. It was about me finally claiming my own story, without the chains of fear and guilt. I was no longer afraid of losing their love because I had learned that I was more than enough, on my own terms. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I knew that I was going to win. The first few days after that meeting felt like a blur, as if I was living in some kind of dream, constantly unsure whether I had actually broken free or if I was still just caught in the same nightmare. But with each passing hour, a sense of clarity washed over me. The weight of their expectations, of their demands, had finally lifted. The freedom I had been craving for so long was now real, but it didn't come without its cost. The house was gone, and with it, so much of my past. I had made the decision to sever all ties with my family, but it wasn't easy. Every part of me that had spent years trying to please them, to fit into their mold, was now screaming in the silence that followed. I hadn't anticipated the loneliness that came with cutting off the very people who had shaped me, no matter how toxic that shaping had been. The house had been a symbol of everything they had imposed on me, but now, without it, I felt untethered. I spent my first night in my new apartment, an apartment that was finally mine, but it felt unfamiliar. The furniture was simple, nothing extravagant. The walls were bare, the windows still without curtains. The echoes of my thoughts bounced around the room like a reminder that the space, however personal, had not yet become a home. There were no memories here, no family photographs or reminders of what once was. It was a blank canvas, and it felt both liberating and suffocating at once. The silence was overwhelming. I had never been truly alone before, not in this way. The constant chatter of my parents' voices, the nagging, the guilt trips, it had all been so suffocating that even their absence felt strange. But it was also necessary. I needed this time. I needed to understand who I was when I wasn't defined by their demands, their expectations, their approval. But no matter how hard I tried, I kept coming back to the same question. What now? I had fought to reclaim my life, but it wasn't as easy as just walking away. I had been so wrapped up in the idea of freedom that I hadn't thought about what would come after. Yes, I had broken free from their control, but I was still facing the wreckage of years spent trying to live up to their idea of who I should be. I couldn't just go back to the way things had been. That was never going to happen. But what was I supposed to do with this new version of myself? This version that wasn't just a daughter but a woman? Alone? I looked at the city outside my window, the streets bustling with life, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I thought back to everything I had gone through, the years of manipulation, the guilt, the fear, the fight. Was it all worth it? Was this empty apartment worth the chaos I had created? Was this freedom truly what I had wanted, or was I just running away from the people who had raised me, the only people I had known? I didn't have the answers, but I couldn't keep asking myself these questions. I had made my choice, and now it was time to face the consequences. I reached for my phone and called Megan, a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. When she picked up, I could hear the warmth in her voice, the kind of familiarity that made me realize how much I had been missing. "Megan, I need to talk," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of everything I had been holding inside. "I'm not sure what to do anymore. Everything feels off." Her response was immediate. "Hey, it's okay. You're going to figure this out. You've already done the hardest part. You've gotten yourself out of that mess. Now you get to decide what comes next." I let her words sink in. She was right. The hardest part was over. The fight with my parents, the manipulation, the guilt, it was all behind me now. But the work was just beginning. Megan and I made plans to meet up the next day. I needed to get out of this apartment, to break the silence, to have someone else remind me that I wasn't alone in this. I needed to see that there was more to life than the mess my family had made of it. The next day, I walked through the city streets, the familiar feeling of walking alone making me feel oddly empowered. The air was crisp, the sun high in the sky, and as I walked, I let the world around me remind me that I wasn't invisible. I wasn't small. I had taken back my life, and that was something worth celebrating. When I met Megan, I saw the concern in her eyes, but also the pride. She had always seen me as strong, and today, she saw a woman who had faced her fears and fought back. We sat at a cafe, sipping coffee as I told her everything. The house, the threats, the choices I had made. And through it all, she didn't judge me. She didn't try to make me feel like I had made a mistake. She simply listened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt understood. "You've been through hell, Alexis, but you're still standing. And that says more about you than anything else ever could," Megan said, her voice steady but kind. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit. I was strong. Despite everything they had thrown at me, I was still. The days after that meeting with Megan felt different. The fog that had clouded my mind for so long was beginning to lift. There was a newfound clarity in the air, like the first breath you take after holding your breath for too long. I had spent years in survival mode, doing whatever I could to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to keep my parents from falling apart. But now, I was no longer driven by fear. I wasn't trying to appease anyone anymore. I was finally living for me, but as freeing as it was, that realization came with a haunting silence. I had learned how to be strong, how to stand up for myself. But the journey wasn't just about breaking free from my family, it was also about redefining who I was in this new life. I had all the space I needed, but what was I going to fill it with? What did I even want anymore? The apartment felt quieter now, emptier. The nights were long, my thoughts swirling, wondering where the next step would take me. I was no longer defined by the expectations of my parents, but for the first time, I felt like I was standing on an edge, unsure of what lay ahead. I had never been given the chance to just be me, to be the person I wanted to be without anyone else's shadow hanging over me. And now, as the weight of my choices sank in, I had to ask myself, what is it that I really want? I had spent so long living in reaction to my parents' needs that I never learned how to live for my own. But now, as the silence of my apartment pressed in on me, I realized that the hardest part wasn't escaping my parents' grasp. It was learning to fill the silence with my own voice. I decided to take the first step by meeting with Dr. Palmer again. Our sessions had always been a place for healing, but today I was coming in with a different mindset. I wasn't just there to process the past. I was there to build something, to create a future that was truly mine. It was time to stop just surviving, to stop merely reacting to what others had done to me, and start living for myself. Dr. Palmer's office had become a place where I found solace in the midst of the chaos. But today, as I sat down across from her, something inside me felt stronger than before. I wasn't the same woman who had walked in here months ago, scared and uncertain. Now, I felt like someone who had been through the fire and come out stronger. Someone who was ready to build the life I had always deserved. "What's on your mind today, Alexis?" Dr. Palmer asked, her voice warm but neutral, a quiet invitation to open up. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I spoke with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I'm trying to figure out what comes next," I said, my voice steady. "I've spent so much of my life trying to keep everyone else happy, but now that I'm free, I feel like I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. And it's terrifying. It's like I've been holding my breath for so long, and now I'm finally exhaling, but I don't know what to do with the air. Dr. Palmer nodded, as though she understood the depths of my struggle. It's completely normal to feel that way, she said gently. When you've been living for others for so long, the process of reintroducing yourself to yourself can feel overwhelming. But it's also a beautiful opportunity. It's a chance to explore who you are without the weight of others' expectations. To figure out what brings you joy, what makes you feel alive. Her words landed deep inside me, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. I had spent so many years trapped in a cycle of trying to meet expectations, trying to please people who never really saw me for who I was. Now, I had to face the fact that I had been so afraid to live for myself. Fear of failing, fear of what people would think, fear of being alone. But in that moment, I realized something. The pain, the fear, it had all been worth it because it had given me this. The freedom to decide, to carve out a life that truly belonged to me. After our session, I left Dr. Palmer's office feeling different. Lighter. But more than that, I felt alive. The silence that had once felt so suffocating now felt like space to create. To breathe without hesitation, to make decisions without apology. I wasn't just stepping into the future, I was creating it. I decided to take action, to start building something for myself. I signed up for art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but had never had the time for. I joined a local community group for women in business, where I could network and learn from others who were making bold moves in their careers. I started to cook for myself, not just to eat, but to enjoy the process. Each day, I made small choices that moved me closer to the life I wanted. But even as I began to embrace this new life, the pull of my past didn't go away. The fear still lingered in the corners of my mind. What if I wasn't really enough? What if all of this newfound freedom, was just a temporary escape from the reality that I was never going to escape them? I still had to face the possibility of confrontation. My parents had never been good at letting go, and now, more than ever, I knew they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. One night, as I sat at the small dining table in my apartment, I received a text message. It was from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over, Alexis. You've made a powerful enemy." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't over. A sense of dread washed over me, but it didn't paralyze me like it once would have. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry that after everything, they still thought they could control me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much stronger I had become. This wasn't just about fighting for the house anymore. It was about fighting for my life, my future, my freedom. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking but my resolve clear. I would not let them pull me back into their world. The time had come for me to face them once and for all, on my terms. No more running. No more caving to their demands. As I walked to the window, staring out over the city that had become my new home, I realized something profound. I had already won. The moment I stepped into this new life, the moment I took control of my own future, I had already defeated them. I was no longer bound by their toxic love. I was free. The twist in this story wasn't just in the fight itself. It was in the realization that the battle had already been won the moment I decided to fight for myself. The rest was just the aftermath, the final showdown, and I was ready. As I stood there at the window, looking out over the city that had become my new life, something inside me shifted. The fear that had once threatened to swallow me up was now just a quiet hum in the background. I had faced my demons, stared down the ghosts of my past, and come out the other side stronger, more certain of who I was than I'd ever been before. I had fought for my freedom, for my peace, for the right to exist without the constant weight of someone else's expectations. And now I was finally free. But even in that moment of clarity, I knew there was still so much ahead of me. This journey, the one I had just begun, wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a neat and tidy story with an easy ending. It was messy, complex, and full of twists I hadn't even begun to anticipate. There would be days of doubt, days when the past crept back in, when I wondered if I was truly capable of living without the weight of my family's approval. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that uncertainty. I knew it would pass. I had learned the hard way that the only way to move forward was to keep walking, even when the path wasn't clear. The phone buzzed again, another message, another reminder that this fight wasn't over. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, no idea where this new life would lead me. But one thing was certain, I wasn't alone anymore. I had learned to rely on myself, and that was something no one could take away from me. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up,